And we're live. Good day, whiskey brothers and sisters, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's 10th book review and the 4th and final edition of Whiskey Island, A Portrait of Islay and Its Whiskey, by author Andrew Jefford, which is right up here with us, right there. Here's the gentleman himself. My name's Dolph. I'm the founder of the Whiskey Book Club. I'm your host tonight, and for those of you new to us, I'll tell you a wee little bit what we're about. What we are geeks. We're a group of whiskey geeks that love to share jams, share our passion for reading, mostly about whiskey and whiskey-related activities. But none, I say none, delve so deeply into this topic with the author than we do. None of them get 10 hours, 12 hours with the author and all the after-dram stuff. We're special. Remember that. So it's a little bit sad today, though, because this is the week we say goodbye to Andrew. He's been a trooper putting up with all my questions and all the homework that the panel's assigned for him. So questions between the book club and the after dram, he's been on the ball every time. And Andrew, in case you didn't know that, I'm not sure what's going on. Let's do this again. Click. Sorry, something weird happened with us. Andrew is an accomplished journalist, consultant, lecturer, tasting judge, guide, and author to 15 other books. And we're really happy to have him with us here tonight. So we're going to start our roundtable introductions with their names, other platform handles, what's in your glasses. We're going to start with Andrew, and we're going kind of alphabetically because we're going to end with Drew, who should be first. But we'll do that. Andrew's first.
Yeah, great to be with you all. So I'm really happy. I've really enjoyed the series of discussions we've had. We've had some fantastic detailed discussions about different aspects of the book. I'm sure that's going to carry on tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Whiskey Island is the book we're talking about, as you all know. A portrait of Islay, not just the whiskies, but also the island itself, its history, its shipwrecks, its nature, its weather, etc., etc. Anything to do with the island, I tried to get into the book. What have I got in my glass? Finally, I've got the right whiskey for the actual session, because I've got Lefroy tonight. Lefroy 4 Oak. I haven't got a lot of whiskies here in France. I live in France, but I'm lucky enough to have that one, and that's what I'm drinking tonight. So looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And Big Dave.
Hey guys, it's Yukon Dave coming from his basement as always. In my glass tonight, or this afternoon, I broke into my fancy little peated malt box and I picked out the Lefroy there because we did the Bowmore a little earlier, three weeks ago. So yeah, that's it from me.
Good. And that's a nice pour for a 12 o'clock dram, buddy. I'm impressed.
Well, I've got two whiskeys poured. This is the first one, so.
Okay, good. And Kent?
Hi, my name's Kent. I go by Whiskey Ass on all platforms, and this afternoon I'm actually doing a bottle kill.
Oh, good stuff.
Yeah, there's a spare on the shelf.
And you and I are thinking the same as well. We got quarter casks again, and I'm going to ask you: did you find the 4 Oak? The foreword.
I have not found any 4 Oak anywhere I've been. I've been looking for 4 weeks now, actually.
Yeah, ever since we saw Andrew the first week, we've been trying.
Yes.
If anyone in Alberta finds those, tell us.
Yep, let us know.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick. I go by Black Hat Whiskey on all platforms, and this afternoon I am diving into Lefroy 15.
Yummy. Thank you very much. And Sheila, you are first.
I'm Sheila. I go by Ann Coney on all of my platforms, and I am doing a quarter cask and a Lag 16 double fister. So I'm taking one out of Dolph's playbook today.
Thank you.
Somebody has to. You're a bad influence.
I am. All right, Drew.
I'm Drew. I go by Actor Semper on most of the ones that it's on, and I also am going for two-fisting both of them, the quarter cask and the 16.
Nice. So 4 glasses out in front of you at 12 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Good for you guys. Excellent. And I've got, like Kent did, I think this is the second week in a row. It might be 3 weeks in all that we've had the same thing. So the quarter cask. And quarter cask I love. This is something that's always open in my place. So this is something I've always had. Well, always had. For the past 6 years, I've always had a bottle to share with people when they come over. So very happy to have it. Glad that we're doing Laphroaig this week. It's a good way to end. And I was telling everyone when we started this, I opened it and it changed how my room smelled because I brew beer as well. So lots of beer in here. But the Laphroaig took over. Imagine that. Imagine that. So panel, we're going to start with you guys tonight. So much of the following questions, we're getting Andrew, we're peppering him with questions. So you're not going to be terribly involved at first until you find stuff on the side that we can introduce. But I want to get you involved. So what is this book to you? And because we talked about it being a travel companion. We talked about it being a whiskey geek must read. And let's just say this last week, it became more of a testimony of life on Islay as well for me. So it was those three for me, and I couldn't really pick one or the other. I want to find out if you guys have one over the other or something different. So throwing that out to you as I take my first sip of Laphroaig for the day.
All right, I'll go first like always. I don't look so bad when I go out last. When I first started reading it, I thought, wow, this is a travel book. But as you get into it, and especially right at the end, it's fun how Andrew takes us from basically getting off the boat or getting off at the airport and running us through the history, and then all of a sudden we're there, and the geek stuff's amazing. There's so much information there that I've never heard of before, and at the end, it is a testimony of the life on Islay. Like I thought, man, I don't think I could survive there. Well, yeah, all
you would do fine on Islay, buddy. Very, very, very well. Anyone else up there?
I got to say, this has been a very much love-hate book.
Okay. And we'll leave it at that and go on to the next.
No, we're not going to leave it there. I have loved this book, but the part I hate about it is that I start reading through and then he'll bring something up and then I'm into the internet. And next thing I know, I've blown a night reading about something that Andrew's written about. And I'm trying to get through this book. There's so many rabbit holes in it that it's just really hard to get through because it just fills your head with the stories, the nuances, the life on the island, the geek of it. It's a very well-rounded book. And if you haven't read it yet, go pick it up tomorrow.
I'm going to echo some of what Kent said. It's a love book, but it's also that, oh my goodness, that rabbit hole. There's references to other books, and I'm diving to my bookshelf, and I'm going, oh, I've got Whiskey Galore, or I've got Bernard's book, and I go off on those rabbit holes, and it's like, oh, I need to go finish my chapter, but I'm sucked in over here, and it's like, oh. It's taking me so long to finish chapters, and I'm a voracious reader, and this book it's consuming, and it's consuming in an amazing way that you're just overwhelmed by the knowledge, and you appreciate Islay that much more, the people and the history. And it's not just about the whiskey, it's that whole encompassing environment.
Excellent. And I'm going to put Sheila and Drew on the spot. Now, Andrew and people watching, if you just started watching us, Sheila and Drew have been a mainstay for the year. They've been here continually. But Sheila's doing her doctorate, and she has to connect with people in Scotland very early in the morning. So a lot of the last 3 weeks, she's been very busy. And Drew's been working his little buns off right now. So they're finally here, and we're happy to have them. But we haven't asked them at all what they thought of the book. And Sheila was one of the people that suggested your original book before it was Whiskey Island. And she's one of the reasons we picked the book. So I'd like to go to both of them and see what they thought the type of book was. Let's go for that.
Well, I'd go with the love story to the island. And I'm just like Nick. Every time I mentioned other books, because I have a lot of those same books on my bookshelf, I'd be turning around and, wanting to grab them. But just like you said, I'm overwhelmed with school. So I'm like, I just don't have time to go grab Bernard's book and start reading that again, or Whiskey Galore, or any of the other books. The mash tuns, sorry, and warts. I'm not even going to grab the right name of the title. So I've been flagging certain sections as I've been going along, just to keep track of where I'm at. The sections we're in right now, just so I stay on track at the moment and not go off into the rabbit holes, because I have a very bad habit of rabbit holing when I'm reading. And this book will do that to you. It will take you off into all of the rabbit holes. But it's also because I come from the Maritimes, and there's references to the Maritimes throughout this book. So it's a little piece of home. But it does have that sense of small town community all throughout the book. And so if you come from a small place, you can find those references. Not necessarily to your specific home, but you find those commonalities as well. So you can almost see yourself. Maybe you're not yourself, but you can see bits of those commonalities across the world in the book as well. You can see characters that you might have grown up with.
Excellent. Thank you. And Drew, do you want to try to follow that, buddy?
I can try. The only thing I can really add is it's taken what I figured would be, let's go to Islay for a week and hit the distilleries too. I think it should be a month, because there's just way much more to do than I thought originally.
Excellent. And I'm just going to add my little 2 cents at the end. Not much. I'm just going to say this was my favorite portion. So Andrew finished strong with this book, which is how I like a book to be. You start off, you're interested, you're brought along in the story, but then you finish really strong. And for me, it's a portrait of the people in the island, and that's really brought me in at the end. So I really appreciate that section of it. So let's go on to this. This is a long question, like I usually have. Sorry, I'm going to do it. Stick with me. So, Andrew, this final quarter of the book focuses even more on the unique personalities, just like I was saying, that you met. Three questions come to mind, so try to remember the three. One, how were you able to accumulate the information, and maybe more importantly, make the connections without the ease of the internet? Because right now, whiskey is huge on the internet. You can get so much information from so many different sources. You didn't have that. The internet was a thing, but the whiskey portion and the whiskey blowing up wasn't at that time. And beyond that, which historical personality and in the flesh personality stands out most for you now, 18 years later? And finally, what I'm really trying to get to is what made the most impact on you? Meeting the distillery royalty that all of us really want to meet and admire you for, or meeting the salt of the earth people that you describe in this final portion. And I don't know if you can choose it, but individuals, you describe them so positively in this chapter and so endearing. So try to take all that and give us whatever you want.
Okay, well, let's start with the first bit of the question about gathering the information. It's interesting, Dolph, that you say it would be easier now. And in one sense, I can see where you're coming from. Yes, it would be easier. You could have Zoom meetings and hook up and long emails and all the rest with people on the island. And of course, you'd have to do it like that at the moment. But I'm really grateful that it wasn't like that back then, that I really had to go there. I had to go there, and I went there a lot. I chiefly went in winter because I couldn't always get sponsorship for the visits, so often I had to fund them myself. And all the cottages were much cheaper in winter.
Yeah,
and that was a good thing in itself, because actually going to Islay in winter, being there in winter, experiencing winter, gave me a real reverence and respect for what the Ilachs lived through and put up with and are ready for. You know, winter on Islay is really a tough time, very difficult. I'm not sure I could have lived out a whole winter there myself. Yep. Okay, so you know, really that was it. I had to go there. I had to meet people, and actually, I found it quite easy to get to know Ilachs and to meet them on their own terms. Maybe because of my background, because I grew up in rural Norfolk. For those of you who don't know the UK, that's kind of prairie country in the UK, a very rural part of the UK. And all my childhood friends were the sons of farmers, and So I grew up with country people, and Elachs are country people. It's a different part of the country, but they're still country people. So I found it quite easy to establish relationships with them, relationships of trust. They would trust me with their information because we met each other on equal terms, and I found that a great privilege and enjoyed it enormously. That's the sort of Elach side of it. Okay. On the distillery side, that was perhaps a little more difficult because, various formal layers to get through in order to be allowed to have the information. But as I said last week, things were changing quite a lot at that time. They were moving from a period where basically they hadn't told anybody anything that they really didn't need to saying to themselves, why do we actually conceal anything? We can't possibly reproduce this anywhere else. So we might as well tell people everything we do. So I was sort of the beneficiary of that. That's, that a lot of the information, the geeky stuff, if you like, the technical distillery stuff had never been written before and never been released into the public domain before. And I felt, again, a sense of privilege to be able to do that. So that's really the answer to your first question. I went there, I met them, I talked to them. There was no alternative, and I'm very glad there wasn't an alternative. Which historical personality and which in the flesh personality stands out? Historical personality, that's very tough because there were so many larger than life characters waiting there from Somerled onwards. But I guess, even though he wasn't an Elach, Talbot Clifton takes some beating as a kind of larger than life character. He really was comprehensively larger than life. So he was quite hard to forget. He was also quite easy to write about because of all the extraordinary things he did. Whereas someone like Ramsay, for example, who was obviously a very interesting guy, commercially very astute, did a huge amount for the island. But, he obviously had the Scottish reserve to him. And so somehow it's a bit hard to sort of to gauge the actual full measure of his life because there were no sources or documents you could really tap in order to do that. Whereas with Talbot Clifton, his wife had written this extraordinary book, absolutely telling everything about him in an extraordinary and vivid way. So it was much easier to get to know him than it was some of the more private Elachs themselves, historical Elachs. And then in the flesh, the name I'm going to mention is a guy who died before the book was published, Ian MacLean. Okay. He was a distillery worker at Lefroy. He'd known Lefroy in Bessie Williamson days. Which is cool. All his life had spent on Islay. He was a lovely, lovely chap. I really, really enjoyed meeting him and talking to him. Yeah. And just sitting and chatting about the past on Islay and, gauging the measure of his life. And when I think back to that experience of writing the book, it's sort of, he is perhaps the person I think of first and foremost. I mean, there's also someone like Norrie Kimball, the peat cutter, but I didn't get to spend as much time with Norrie as I did with Ian. So Ian MacLean would be the name I'd mention there. Which meant more to me, meeting the distillery royalty or the salt of the earth Elachs. Well, in the end, it's the people on the island who I met who meant the most to me because it's their place in the end. Very often the distillery people, less so now because the distilleries really try and use Elachs as managers now. I can't say this for sure, but I think all of the managers, or almost all of the managers are Elachs now, but that wasn't the case in the past. So the distillery royalty very often in the past had come in from somewhere else and they were there to do a job and they did their job very well and they did it full of respect and professionalism, and that was great. But it's still a book about a place. It's a book about a place. The place is Islay. So the people that meant the most to me were the Elachs I was able to meet and get to know. And I really found that immensely rewarding. And once again, to use the same word, a privilege, really. They let me into their lives and I was able to record those. And no doubt things have changed now. No doubt the atmosphere on the island is different. The employment prospects are different. The sort of the international visibility is very different. All moments are special moments, but this was a special moment. That was just beginning to happen, but it hadn't happened yet. It was still quite a private, genuinely Hebridean place. I don't know if it's still as much true today as it was then. So anyway, my aim was, having been given this privileged access, was to try and record that moment in time and that place in moment in time with all the fidelity which I could muster. So that was what I tried to do.
And thank you for that. And you know what? I think if we did go there in wintertime like you did, I think we would get a better idea of the people. Because if you're going to Feis Isla, if you're going during that festival, it's too busy. You're not seeing it. And it's beautiful weather, or better than the wintertime. Let's call it beautiful. Let's hope it would be beautiful. But I think if you really want to know the people, you kind of go there when things are a little bit somber, a little bit different. I like that.
You know, Dolph, I'm going to stop you really quickly. I'm going to say, no, you can still go. No, I'm going to stop you. Because when I went, it was just before the festival, and we stopped at Arbig on a Sunday morning, and it was Jackie's son's birthday, and she made time for us.
Aw.
She did a tour. We had a small group. She did a tour. Her husband's there at the cottage setting up for the birthday, and she's touring this group of Canadians and Swedes around, pouring us drams and talking about her son's birthday. And it's, as Andrew says, it's just that salt of the earth, that honesty, but she's sharing so much of the island as well. So it does exist, and it's finding those moments with them.
Nice. The hospitality, the openness, the beautiful people. So I'm wrong. That's all right. It's not the first, not the last time. I'm gonna be wrong. How about the rest of you? Anything else to add to that and your perception? So Sheila, you've been there, and Drew as well. Anything to add to that? The perception of the people, or seeing the big personalities? What would you? What's my?
I had a comment, but after Nick's comment, I probably want to keep it to myself, but I'll say it anyway. Like when you wrote this book, it was almost 20 years ago, right? Or yeah,
getting on for.
So the time and the effort that you put into this, did the people see this and open up to you more than they would today? Because everybody's a whiskey tourist now. I don't see there being that much in 2000, 2002 and that kind of stuff. Do you think?
Well, it's a good question, Dave, and the answer is I don't know, because I haven't gone there and done it all again. But I don't know. There's something special about Isla, and when you live there, the spirit of the place takes you over to some extent. And I'm sure there is still a lot of gentle tolerance and preparedness to share and to tell on the island. You know, I was struck when I wrote the book by the fact that how many of the incomers, those who'd come from somewhere else and who'd settled on the island, immediately, were infused by that spirit of Hebridean gentleness and respectfulness. It almost sort of settles on you without you noticing and without you being able to do anything about it. So I dare say that the spirit of the place does still take people over. But I suspect that now there is more toing and froing. Well, not at the moment, of course, but when all this is over, there is more toing and froing. And there is more internationalism and more, upmarket this and upmarket that. And I suspect it is a bit different. But I can't confirm that.
So how many times,
go ahead.
Can I ask how many times you actually went to Isla to do this book?
I never actually made a log of it. I could look at my diaries, but at a guess, something like 6 or 7 times for a couple of weeks each, something like that.
So the people saw you and said, "Wow, this guy's serious. He keeps coming back."
Yeah, like a bad penny, kept coming back.
And I'm going to piggyback on that, because we haven't discussed why you picked Isla. Because Scotland, it's a vast, beautiful country. Why did you pick Isla specifically before you started this? Or did you start at more general terms and then focus on Isla for some reason? So let's just find that out.
Well, I remember when I was thinking of the book, talking to Michael Jackson, who I knew pretty well before he died. And, he was a canny guy. always had a sort of eye to the business chance. And he looked at me and said, do you really think there's going to be enough people to buy a book about Islay alone? You need to write about everything together, otherwise it won't have the potential market that it might have. But I wasn't dissuaded. I just fell in love with the place. I really fell in love with the place. I thought it was the most beautiful and striking and moving and dramatic and romantic place I'd ever been. Romantic, I know, is a word you cherish, Dolph, so let's throw it in there.
And it's not a bad thing. We decided that last week. The romanticism is not a bad thing.
Indeed. And I had no children at the time. I wasn't married at the time either. So there was nothing stopping me going back there repeatedly. And going back there and writing the book was a great opportunity to be nosy, to find out everything one could possibly wish to find out about the island. So it was okay. I thought this book should exist. I did think this book should exist, but it was also a sort of personal quest and a search for personal understanding about a place that I've fallen in love with.
Nice.
So it was the pursuit of a love affair as well, a love affair with a place.
Nice. And that's romantic if I've ever heard of the last sentence. So.
I can't imagine what this book would be like if you didn't use those terms that you fell in love with the place. Would it be like half as thick? Just a book to get in and get out?
Maybe.
Like it shows. It shows in the book.
But we haven't heard from Sheila and Andrew.
Well, and Drew.
Drew, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I've forgotten the question, but I'm kind of going back to Dave's comment about whether or not we think it would be possible that people would be as open today. I do think they would. I think maybe some of the distilleries would possibly pawn you off on, well, all this information is now available online and go look it up there.
Yeah.
You might not get as in-depth access to all of that information, but I think the people, because the historical study and the ethnographic elements to it and telling the history of the island, I think that section of it and that openness, you probably would still get all of that connection and that storytelling.
No. I just, for myself, I have yet to go to a distillery or rest and be told it's like, look it up on my website. It's like, no, they will gladly still walk you through the basicest stuff for the 100th time. It's just in my experience. I don't think anybody's ever walked up to me and said, just go check my website.
Doesn't some of the distilleries have the tourist tour?
Yeah.
And then some of the other ones you go to, they actually take you and show you what's really going on? Like, I know we learned that somewhere along the way in this thing that
a lot of them have different tiers.
They have different tiers of tourism.
Yeah.
Depending on how much you pay sometimes. But if you get to know them, and I've learned this in my other travels, you get to know them and you show an interest and you show them that it's more than a fleeting interest, they're usually very open to do it, especially if you're talking to the head distiller or if you can get the owner or the manager, just someone, and they see that you're passionate about it, they're going to bring you back there.
And let's be honest, if you're researching something because you're either researching it for a scientific study or you're researching it for a book, you're going to get different level access than somebody who's going on a tour.
We found a lot of that.
Well, that leads me to
doing Canadian tours. You get talking to the owner or the distiller, and as you talk to them, they realize that, hey, they're actually interested. So we've got some very down in the dungeon kind of tours where well, this isn't normally part of the tour, but come look at the grinding mill and taste the grains we're doing and stuff like this. We got right in there. And, Dolph, you heard secondhand from that one when you showed up at a similar distillery and they said, oh, yeah, he was here last year.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And they remembered you too. So that's great. Right?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to get to this question because I got to move on. We're on question 2, guys, out of the 20.
Halfway in.
We are talking about the distillery specifically and knowing a specific, here, I'll just read it. So combine all these factors, especially the rapid fermentations, full charges, the descending line arms, the wider cuts, and you have a full explanation as to why Lagavulin is so different from Caol Ila, despite the fact that it uses identical malt. Now, that's not the question. The question itself is for the panel. Have any of you, like me, tried to commit certain types or certain segments of information like that about one of the distilleries we like a lot to memory? And I have, but then going to the other ones, I'm messing them up. So in my mind, I'm just going to keep the book and just refer to the book. How much of a charge and the line arm? Is it up? Is it down? And well, everything like that. So I'm wondering, did you try it first like me and then give up? Or do you have a memory that you're able to, you think, connect and hold on to this for a while? I'll leave that to you guys. What do you think?
Bits and pieces. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I tried.
I have a broken brain, so I'll have the best excuse in the world to never have to remember anything and just rely on the phone.
Yeah, I tried in the beginning, but it hits the one. It's like, yeah, okay, no, that one that's got the wooden worm tubs. I can't remember.
We're talking about that in the after-dram, though, so you'll be
okay. It's like everything else that I read a lot of stuff. I remember bits and pieces that they charge their stills at way, 60, 70%. I've used some of this information just recently, and I said, oh yeah, it's around here, it's around there. I'm just happy to get close.
Just remember,
and I don't think I could actually remember this unless I had to actually physically explain it to somebody where I had to have the exact facts. Once you teach it to somebody else, then it'll become ingrained in your brain, in my brain anyway. So for right now, I'll pick up the book, and I know I've got all that information, which is great.
Yeah.
And Andrew, when I was referring to the online stuff that you could get, so this information that you wrote in the book is now available more widely online. One, because we could just look your thing up and it will pop up online. Whereas when you wanted to find out how much they charged the still, either still, that's something you have to do in person and convince them that they should tell you the information. So I thought that section would have been decidedly harder.
It was quite hard, and particularly I remember getting all the information about the condensers was very hard.
Who went and actually counted the tubes and the condensers? That was this last. When was that?
Yeah,
the last portion of the book. Someone you thanked them at the very end.
I think that was Duncan McGillivray at Brookladdy, as far as I remember. Yeah, they went to a lot of trouble.
Nice.
To get all that technical stuff together.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going into, we haven't talked about the Scotch Whisky Association at all. And we generally do. This comes up anytime we talk about scotches, they come up for some reason. And for the very first time we saw this in the book. So I'm going to click up. Here's the quote. So Mackey launched himself into most controversies of the day, not the least of them, the celebrated "What is Whiskey?" controversy of 1905-1909. So Andrew, this is the first time we hear of this in the book, right? Or did I miss something else from the SWA somewhere? And what do you think of it? Or what do they think of the SWA on the island? Do they like them because they're protecting, or are they a little bit in the way? Because I think that ELAC don't like being told what to do. So I'll ask you.
Yeah, well, I never detected any hostility to the Scotch Whisky Association on the island. It does a pretty good job for what is an industry. Whiskey is an industry. It's not primarily agricultural. It is primarily industrial. And the Scotch Whisky Association does a very good job for that. And, nobody was doing anything on the island that would rub the Scotch Whisky Association up the wrong way. So that was fine. I mean, you mentioned this particular controversy. That's quite an interesting historical note, because this was all down to Islington Council in London deciding that only malt whiskey really could be whiskey, and it all got put to the test. And it was at that point that they finally nutted out the status of grain whiskey within Scotch whiskey as a whole. So that was an interesting historical point. But no, I never detected any hostility. You know, we'll come and talk about the Elachs being forced to do things by outsiders a bit later when we talk about the Islay Today chapter. But the actual whiskey industry side of it was not an example of that, I don't think.
Okay. And anything to add, my friends, about the SWA in relation to this book? Because we've talked about them before, but may not here. So I just want to give you the chance before I go off into another very lengthy question.
But isn't everything coming off of Islay single malt? Or
well, they put into tons of blends as well, right?
Well, they
yeah.
off to do blends, but it's, I think, well, at the time of the writing of this book, there were no continuous stills on the island, was there?
And I don't think there are now. I mean, I may be wrong, but I don't think there are now. So, yeah, it's a malt whiskey island. It's malt whiskey, of course, absolutely. Yeah. But nobody producing malt whiskey would ever deny grain whiskey's right to exist, because it's in blending that most of the production of most distilleries finds its market. So they're not going to fight against that, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, they got a place to sell their products.
Yeah.
All right, we ready for this? It's a long question. All right, put your thinking hats on. Andrew writes of the lagging Kalila disposal of liquid and solid waste, which made me question how many distilleries' waste flow directly into the ocean. And it made me think of my father-in-law. He used to say, because he was a scientist and he talked in the 1960s, they said, the solution of pollution is dilution. They just threw it out there, and the same thing. Everything, we've got so much space, we've got so much ocean, they didn't care. They would just dispose of it that way, and you'd never see it because it's a small drop in a large ocean. But it also reminded me on page 117, Bowmore talked about their heat recovery system. And that also made me think the dichotomy of waste environmental progression. So I find it funny that the innovations that they did in Scotland to save money, streamline the process, make things work for them, are now at newer distilleries. They claim it as something that they're doing for the environment. And I'm not sure if they are doing it for the environment. I might be a bit jaded and thinking that it's a marketing ploy that they came up with after they already established their distillery. So they're making money, they're saving money, and then someone in marketing said, you know what, we're doing something really cool here. Let's publish this. Let's push this out there as we're environmentally friendly. So are they trying to be more conscious? Are new distilleries trying to be more conscious? Or is it just being cheap and effective, like the Scots generally are? So I'm throwing that out to everybody, please. What do you think?
Isn't it best practices right now? Like this is the best way to do this, and just happens to be environmentally friendly.
You're saving on heat, sure. You're recycling the heat, fine. What else? Because
there's a lot of marketing spin. Let's be honest. Yeah. If marketing can spin any story, they're going to spin it because it increases sales. If a distillery is doing something that is cool, they're going to spin it because that's what sells. If they're doing something that is appealing to the current environment, whether it is doing cask strength, whether it's doing an innovation in what type of cask, or linking with sort of different type of branding, whatever the case. If it's that in thing and they can show, hey, we're doing it and we can market it, I think that's what marketing's role is. A lot of these distilleries, though, are being innovative because they need to be for businesses, for their business sense. Like, they need to save money, they need to be effective, and they need to find ways to still run their business and make money.
Yeah. Okay. I can agree with that.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking in the first place, but you're more eloquent. Thank you. Good. Andrew, thoughts?
Well, you know, big owners, mostly the big distilleries on Islay, you know, they take ESG very seriously. They're going to have all of their big institutional shareholders demanding ESG. So yeah, they certainly take it seriously. More interesting to me really is I wonder if they're still tipping all the waste into the Sound of Islay as they were back in 2003, 2004, or if they've come up with another solution, because, you know, I mean, it's not particularly toxic waste. I remember everybody telling me that the fish clustering around the waste pipe was sort of fatter than all the other fish in the Hebrides. And of course, it's true that the tidal race 7 knots through the Sound of Islay will mean it's dispersed very widely, very swiftly.
Yeah.
And yet it's still kind of, you know, there are still toxins in there of some sort or other. And it would be better if it was all purified and recycled and you know, the circle was completed. That would be quite expensive. It would have landscape implications. It would mean more plant on the island and all that sort of thing. But it could be done. So I'm curious as to whether that's been done or not. I don't know if anybody's been to Islay in the last year or two who's hooking into this who can actually let us know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would be curious as to whether it still is the case that they're tipping it all into the Sound of Islay.
Me as well.
I mean, almost the most negative environmental aspect of them doing that was the fact that you had to have all these heavy lorries the whole time carrying heavy liquid waste from. I mean, there are three Kidalton distilleries. That's a long round trip all the way from Kidalton right over to Colila, next to Colila. So you know, that was a lot of engine pollution and a lot of air pollution as well involved in those journeys. So again, if it could be done locally and close to the distillery and you could naturally recycle the waste products, that would be better.
And you think what's the effect on the environment for dumping it into the ocean? One, maybe the temperature changes things as well, but maybe that's less of an environmental impact than, like you said, the air pollution. And whenever you have a ship, there's other types of pollution that goes with the ship as well. So we'll throw that out there. Maybe someone on the site can tell us if we'll answer your query, hopefully. I'm going to throw this one up here. And we're going to the next chapter. So we're talking about shipwrecks. And I was looking forward to this because, I don't know, it's kind of a kid thing for me. I always think about shipwrecks. It's very dramatic. It's very exciting. So the prime purpose of this chapter, what you said, is to describe the circumstances surrounding Islay's 3 most tragic wrecks. And it also describes, and what I got this and didn't expect it, was the horrible cost of war to those in service and to those who served in a different way, the people cleaning up on the Isle and the people that are there after those disappeared, or the deaths that they still see themselves, picking up the pieces. So we've read these stories of support and despair. And what I have to say is I'm really happy that you tempered the support with the despair. You're seeing the people coming together and helping with how horrible certain things were. So Andrew, is this how you see most of the Illic? Really helpful, but hardy people, giving people in the face of adversity, poverty, and everything else that you've described? Is that their defining characteristics?
Yes, absolutely. Because, you know, life on Islay is very tough. So anything disastrous and tragic can happen to anybody at any time. Everybody knows that. So everybody is always ready to help because you never know when it'll be your turn, when you'll need the favor returned. You'll need to help in its turn. But then over and beyond that, I mean, each of these 3 major wrecks, the ones I describe in detail, the Exmouth of Newcastle, the Tuscania, and the Otranto, were all truly terrible catastrophes, shocking. And no matter where they'd happened, people would have rushed to help, of course, anywhere in the world, I'm sure. Nobody could have regarded those sort of incidents with any equanimity and said, well, that's just the sea. You couldn't say that. It was terrible. But and, you know, all of them were all the more terrible because they all involved people who, under normal circumstances, in times of peace and plenty, would have had no business at all to have been in any of those boats.
Yeah.
The latter 2 were all there because of the war, and the Exmouth and Newcastle were there because essentially of the potato famine and the way Ireland had been misgoverned by the British. So they were all victims twice over, if you like. Victims in the first place to have been there, victims in the second place to have met this terrible end.
And the first one, was that clearance related as well, or is it just the famine?
Well, there were also clearances in Ireland too, but principally the principal motive for the Irish leaving Ireland was because of the desperate situations of the famine.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And I'm going to stick with kind of an environmental theme, if I may, guys. So what was surprising to me was the conflict between the islanders and the environmentalists. So panel, do you relate more with one than the than the other? The environmentalists, the ones that are trying to preserve the island, the geese, or whatever else you have. And Andrew, have you followed this over the last 20 years, and are they more symbiotic now, or are they still a little bit at odds? So let's start with the panel. Do you relate with one or the other? The people or the government trying to tell them what to do to preserve things?
I always wonder, where do these environmentalists, do they just drop onto the island and then tell you what you should be doing? And that just pisses me off when that happens.
See? So you're with the people. Good.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I'm with Dave on that
as well.
Even locally, whenever we seem to have a big environmental rally, it's people from outside of the area coming in and raising the biggest ruckus. So yeah, I'm with the people as well. They're trying to make a living. Yes, you don't need to rape the lands to do it, but in the end, you have to survive as well.
Thank you, sir. Any environmentalists? None? No environment. Okay.
I'm not usually, no.
So I'm going to say the description of the genesis between this adversarial relationship is the opposition to being told what to do. And Andrew's got a great quote later on. Isla, thus, is neither owned nor run by Ilex. So is this the prevailing sentiment with the Ilex? And then we're going to go back to what we said before. The question for you, Andrew, are they more symbiotic finally or not?
Yeah, well, once again, I arrived at a historical moment. And let's say the historical moment was the fact that environmental organizations had realized the preciousness of the island and its bird life, notably, and its other forms of wildlife. 1 to 2 decades before that. So they'd come over to try and help, protect, whatever.
Yeah.
But they hadn't really done it in the right way. They'd done it in a slightly high-handed manner. You know, we know best. And that was very much the wrong thing to do. It was interesting to be there when I was there because the lesson had been learned. And the environmental organizations were all working very hard to work with the islanders because, in a way, that was the tragedy. No Ilach is not an environmentalist. Nobody on Isla is trying to destroy the island's environment because everybody's lives and livelihoods depends on the island's environment. It's the environment in its different aspects that is drawing all the visitors to the island. So actually, there was an enormous commonality of interest between the environmental organizations that arrived on the island and the Ilaks themselves. It's just the relationship was initially politically fractious. But as I say, I was there at a time when the lessons had been learned and the outside organizations were working much more hand in hand with the islanders and listening to the islanders about the best way to proceed. But your other question, in a way, Dolph, is more long-term significant.
Okay.
Because it's still true that Isla is not owned by Ilaks. It's owned by outsiders. And it's still true, as far as I know. And I'm very happy to be corrected on this. Please, anybody, if you have anything to communicate, get in touch with me. It's very easy to find out ways to get in touch with me through the web. But, Isla is still not run from Isla. It's run from outside by others. That's what I call the democratic deficit in the book. And that did seem to me a shame. And it was also a shame that some of the island's outstanding farmers, I mentioned Blair and Margaret Rosger, weren't actually able to own their land. I don't know if that's still the case. Once again, things might have changed. But when I was researching and writing the book, that wasn't possible because of the land ownership arrangements on the island. The island is owned from outside, but it's owned from outside by immensely rich people who don't need to make a living from it. So they're prepared to underwrite their investment in various ways, which means that they're beyond the reach of ever having to sell through having economically failed in whatever business venture they had. So this is very frustrating for tenant farmers, for example, who can do an outstanding job for generation after generation and still never have a chance really of ever coming to own their land. So I think that was much more of a problem, and I suspect it remains a problem. But I also suspect that the balance of the economy on the island has now changed so much with its enormous whiskey-related and nature-related tourist potential that slowly tourism is becoming by far the most significant economic activity on the island, and that will sort of make other things, less and less relevant. A lot of the farming on the island was always pretty much touch and go. It only relied on, it was only kept viable by the subsidies that you had for environmental schemes. So, I suspect that whole process of the island slowly assuming a largely tourist vocation is still underway.
Okay. And you know what? Let's stick with that subsidy theme. And Andrew, with the possibility of alienating some of our capitalists, Kent, essentially, I'm still going to ask: would you say that you lean decidedly to the left, to socialist ideals? And I'm gonna link that with the next one, because in the book you talk about the subsidies quite a bit, and you describe, and you do a great job of describing why they are needed to survive, and they couldn't survive without the subsidies. And I'm wondering if you still see it that way, and was there anybody that you met that could have survived without the subsidies, or if they were reduced or repealed? Is it essential still?
Okay, well, you asked me a very straight political question, so I'll give you a very straight answer on that. Yes. Politically, I always consider myself a radical centrist. Okay, so I'm not on the left and I'm not on the right, and I think these two terms are immensely damaging and hugely politically uncreative, and I really deplore them. So I'm a radical centrist, and I also detest party politics. I detest the stupidities that necessarily go with party politics. I'm all for talented, creative individuals stepping up into the political forum, giving us whatever they have to give, handing it on, but without badges and assignments and the historical baggage that goes with right and left.
So that's the radicalism there that you just...
Yeah, I'm a radical, but I'm a
right and left.
A radical centrist or a radical independentist, if you prefer, or a free thinker, or however you want to put it.
Good.
That's kind of the way I go in on that. But in answer to your question about subsidies, it's a very, very difficult place to make money from farmland. It's really tough. For the Hebrides, there's quite rich farmland there, but by comparison to the Black Isle, for example, or by comparison to farmland in Lincolnshire in England, this is tough country, and you can't make much money from it. And I didn't go through farmers' accounts as much as perhaps I would have liked to, or perhaps I should have done for the book. So I can't say if there were farmers making money on the island without subsidy, but I rather doubt it. And I rather doubt it still. And if I was to go back to Ireland, a very interesting question to ask would be whether Brexit has had an effect on the island, because Brexit meant that the UK left the European Common Agricultural Policy, and a lot of those subsidies were connected to the European Common Agricultural Policy, because whatever you thought of Europe, it was very, very good at looking after less fortunate parts of its remit. And the Scottish Isles were one of those parts. So, I'd be very interested to find out if Brexit has posed difficulties for the islanders. Okay. What the British government always said was that it was going to not exactly duplicate, but substitute for all of the environmental schemes and subsidies that were in place, and farmers weren't going to miss out. But you hear a lot of contrary stories since the Brexit process has been underway. So that would be very interesting to find out. We'll find out sooner or later, I'm sure.
And the biggest subsidy was because of the geese, correct? That was the largest of them? Okay.
Yeah, because Islay is a very, very special place for geese, because the geese come down from the north, essentially, to overwinter. And Islay had an awful lot of grass on it. You go to Skye, you won't find as much grass. If you go to most Hebridean islands, you won't find as much grass. So the geese were pretty happy there. But the geese are sort of hugely profligate with the grass. They barely bother to digest it at all. They just gobble it up and use the juice and crap it out.
Yep.
Full of good things. And so that, it's very difficult for the farmers to see that all their wonderful grassland, grazing land, destroyed in that kind of way. So if they weren't going to have it in for the geese, they needed some kind of reward for not doing that. Sorry about this phone, but my wife will answer it in just a second.
That's okay. We're good.
It's her mum.
She'll answer her mother's phone. Okay. It's okay. But
yeah.
Sorry, I think there was three that you referred to, three subsidies that were fairly common, the geese being the most important, and the two others. One was because they're living in an isolated area, which we see here in Canada quite a bit for our communities up north. What was the third? I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry.
Well, I can't remember either in those terms, but there were many other subsidies for natural, for support of other birds, for example, corncrakes, where there was subsidy for creating grassy areas on the edge of your fields where the corncrakes could nest in safety. And I think the seals attracted some subsidy too, because the seals ate an awful lot of fish, which the fishermen then couldn't fish. So whenever there was a squabble between a farming or a gathering community and the natural world in its less common aspects, then there was generally a subsidy for that.
Okay. Well, and I'm hoping the subsidies were paid for by the distilleries and all the money that they're taking in and possibly paying in tax. I'm not sure what the tax structure is for them or if they're exempt in large amount. But being kind of the socialist, even though I'm going to say I'm more left than right. I'm sorry, Andrew. But I'm hoping they're getting enough of that to pay for these things on this beautiful island that they're gaining from. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. We're going to do a quick wrap up. So if anyone has any last comments before I do our conclusion, let's hear them now. We're going to end with Andrew, though.
Okay, well,
okay.
I'm really glad we've got to this bit of the book, because it was really, in many ways, my favorite bit of the book. And no bit of the book was more moving to write than the bit about the shipwrecks, actually living through imagining mentally what those people went through on board those ships was really very moving and tough, and moving is the word, part of the writing experience of writing the book. So I would just like to raise my glass in memory to all of those who lost their lives in those three shipwrecks off the coast of Islay, and in other shipwrecks as well, much less well known about than those three.
Thank you very much. That's a great sentiment, which I'll, of course, drink to. Whiskey brothers and sisters, that's the Whiskey Book Club tonight. We're moving our conversation from this more formalized format to a more relaxed, equally engaging, probably more colorful conversation. Author Andrew right here. This gentleman will of Whiskey Island, a portrait of Isla and its whiskeys. And here's the book right here. And some people will have the other book, Peat, Smoke and Spirit. I hope, yeah, they're there. He'll, of course, be with us. And really, there's nothing better than talking about whiskey, drinking whiskey, and spending time with great people. So you should really join us. And we'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes on this channel for the After Dram. If you don't want to miss a minute of our next book, which is in 2 weeks, A Glass Apart with author Finan O'Connor, please click the like button and the subscribe button. And here's the book right there that we're doing in 2 weeks. Hopefully we see you back in 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. See you all very, very, very soon.